A poor artist painted a mural for free, never knowing it moved a wealthy patron to tears. The irony of these words echoed in Marcus's mind as he stared at his empty refrigerator. The lone apple sitting in the corner, a painful reminder of how far his dreams had fallen. 3 years of art school, 6 years of hustling, and all he had to show for it was a studio apartment with peeling paint and bills that multiplied faster than his commissions. The morning light filtered weakly through his single window, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. Outside, Chicago's winter had settled in early, the November wind carrying an icy bite that seemed determined to find every crack in the building's old facade. Marcus closed the refrigerator door with a sigh that came from somewhere deeper than his lungs, a sigh that carried the weight of fading dreams. His phone buzzed. Another rejection, probably. Another gallery that loved his work but couldn't find space in their current schedule. Marcus ignored it, turning instead to the half-finished canvas propped against the wall. His latest piece, a swirl of colors that somehow captured both hope and despair in the same brushstroke. He titled it Perseverance, though lately it felt more like futility. The phone buzzed again, insistent. Annoyed, Marcus snatched it up, prepared for disappointment. Community center looking for artist. Local mural project. Please call if interested. His thumb hovered over the delete button. Another unpaid gig. Another opportunity for exposure. Marcus had learned the hard way that exposure didn't pay rent. But something stopped him. Perhaps the way the morning light caught the dried paint on his fingertips, reminding him why he'd fallen in love with art in the first place. Before he could talk himself out of it, he was dialing the number. Across town, in the glass-walled penthouse of the city's most exclusive high-rise, Elaine Whitmore stared unseeing at the panoramic view of Lake Michigan. The water sparkled under the morning sun, a beauty that once would have moved her to reach for her camera. Now, like everything else, it simply existed, present but unable to penetrate the numbness that had enveloped her for the past 2 years. Misery. Whitmore? Her assistant's voice broke through her thoughts. The board meeting is in 30 minutes. Elaine nodded, turning from the window. At 46, she was the picture of success, CEO of Whitmore Foundation, one of the Midwest's largest philanthropic organizations, with a personal fortune that put her on national wealth lists. The kind of success her parents had dreamed of when they immigrated to America with nothing but hope and determination. The kind of success that meant nothing since Thomas died. The community center project? She asked, her voice carrying the crisp professionalism that had become her armor. All approvals are in place. Construction begins next month. Good. The word fell flat, like everything else these days. The community center had been Thomas's dream. Her son had wanted to create a space where children from the neighborhood where he'd volunteered could learn, play, and create, away from the gangs and violence that plagued the area. He'd drawn up plans during his architecture studies at Northwestern, plans he never got to implement. The drunk driver who took Thomas had also stolen Elaine's ability to feel joy, but she could still fulfill his dream. It was the only thing that got her out of bed most mornings. Oh, and they've found an artist for the mural, her assistant added. Some local painter. He's agreed to do it pro bono. Elaine merely nodded. The mural had been Thomas's idea too, something inspiring for the children. She'd insisted it be included in the plans, though she hadn't expected anyone to volunteer to create it for free. Would you like to meet him? He's starting preliminary work today. No, Elaine said quickly. People meant small talk, questions, sympathetic looks when they inevitably learned about Thomas. Just make sure he gets what he needs. Marcus stood before the massive blank wall, intimidated by its sheer size. The community center construction site buzzed with activity, workers laying foundation, electricians running wires, the steady beep of backing trucks providing an urban soundtrack to his racing thoughts. It's nearly 800 square feet. The site manager, a weathered man named Ray, explained. Previous muralist backed out when he learned there was no budget. You sure you're up for this, kid? Marcus swallowed. 800 square feet. His largest previous work had been a 20-foot section in a friend's cafe. But the magnitude of the canvas before him sparked something he hadn't felt in months. Genuine excitement. I'm sure, he said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Ray handed him a folder. These are the parameters. The director wants something hopeful, something that showcases the potential of the neighborhood kids. Beyond that, you've got creative control. Marcus flipped through the pages, skimming requirements and dimensions. At the back was a simple note on expensive stationery. Make it something they can dream into. No signature. Just those 7 words that somehow carried the weight of a mandate. That night, Marcus stayed late in his studio, sketching concepts for the mural until his fingers cramped. For the first time in months, his mind buzzed with ideas instead of worries. The rent was still due, his account still overdrawn, but those concerns had receded to the background, replaced by colors and compositions and possibilities. The mural would feature children, not idealized or sanitized versions, but real kids with real struggles and real hope. It would incorporate elements of the neighborhood, both its challenges and its beauty. And at its center, a simple concept: growth through nurturing. When he finally collapsed into bed at 3 a.m., Marcus slept without the usual tangle of anxiety dreams. Instead, he dreamed in vibrant colors, his mind already painting the wall that waited for him. Elaine didn't intend to visit the construction site. She usually relied on reports and photographs, maintaining her distance from the physical manifestation of Thomas's dream. It hurt too much to see it taking shape without him there to witness it. But a meeting cancellation left her afternoon unexpectedly free, and something pulled her toward the site. Perhaps it was the unseasonably warm December day, or perhaps it was the approaching anniversary of Thomas's death, making her feel closer to him through his project. The site had transformed since her last visit. The steel skeleton of the building had been enclosed, windows installed, the parking lot paved, and on the long wall facing the street, a mural was taking shape. Elaine approached slowly, staying at a distance where she could observe without being noticed. A young man balanced on scaffolding, his movements confident as he worked. Even from her position, she could see his complete absorption in the task. The way his body seemed to dance slightly with each stroke, the careful precision of his motions. The mural itself was only partially completed, but already it took her breath away. Children of various ages and ethnicities emerged from the wall, their faces rendered with such emotion and detail that they seemed almost alive. They were surrounded by stylized representations of the neighborhood. Buildings both broken and beautiful, streets that transformed from cracked concrete to flowing rivers of possibility. And in the center, still just an outline, was a tree. Its roots delved deep into concrete, its branches reaching skyward, with children at various stages of climbing its trunk toward a sun that hadn't yet been painted. Something twisted in Elaine's chest, a sensation so foreign it took her a moment to identify it as feeling. Real feeling, breaking through the numbness that had been her constant companion. The artist, young she now saw, perhaps in his late 20s, descended from the scaffolding to mix more paint. His jeans and t-shirt were splattered with color, his dark hair pushed back haphazardly, leaving a smudge of blue across his forehead. He looked tired but radiantly alive in a way that made Elaine suddenly, painfully aware of her own emotional deadness. She watched him for nearly an hour, unnoticed among the various contractors and workers who passed through. When the wind picked up, carrying clouds that threatened rain, she reluctantly returned to her car, the image of the unfinished mural burning in her mind. That night, for the first time since Thomas died, Elaine dreamed of something other than loss. Days turned into weeks as Marcus poured himself into the mural. December brought freezing temperatures that made painting outdoors challenging, but the community center project manager arranged for portable heaters and a tarp system that allowed him to continue working. The mural had become more than a project, it was salvation. Each day spent bringing the wall to life was a day he felt purposeful, connected to something larger than his struggles. Local children began stopping by after school, watching him work with wide eyes and endless questions. He started keeping extra brushes on hand, occasionally letting them add small details under his guidance. What Marcus didn't know was that he had another regular observer. Every few days, Elaine found reasons to visit the construction site, always keeping her distance, always watching the mural and its creator with an intensity that surprised her. She learned his name from the project manager's reports: Marcus Chen, 28, graduate of the Art Institute of Chicago, no significant exhibitions or commissions, volunteered at a downtown youth center teaching art classes. The facts told her nothing about why his work affected her so deeply, why the evolving mural seemed to speak directly to the frozen places inside her, or why, for the first time in 2 years, she found herself thinking about the future with something other than dread. As Christmas approached, the weather turned brutal. Chicago winters took no prisoners, and even with the heaters and tarps, painting became nearly impossible. Marcus's hands cracked from the cold and paint, blood occasionally mixing with color as he worked stubbornly through the pain. On December 23rd, a blizzard shut down the city. Marcus, determined to make progress before the holiday, had ignored the weather warnings and gone to the site early. By mid-morning, the snow was falling so heavily that visibility dropped to mere feet. The construction workers had all left, but Marcus stayed, huddled in his inadequate jacket, adding detail to a young girl's face. A girl who reminded him of his sister back in California, whom he couldn't afford to visit this Christmas. When his phone died and his fingers grew too numb to hold a brush, Marcus finally admitted defeat. Packing his supplies with stiff hands, he stepped out from under the tarp into a white world. The bus would likely not be running, and his apartment was 4 miles away. He'd made it less than a block when headlights cut through the curtain of snow. A black SUV pulled alongside him, the passenger window lowering to reveal a woman's face. Striking, severe, somewhere in her 40s. "Get in," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You'll freeze to death out here." Marcus hesitated only briefly before the bitter cold made the decision for him. As he settled into the heated leather seat, the woman studied him with an intensity that made him self-conscious of his paint-splattered appearance. "Thank you," he managed through chattering teeth. "I didn't realize how bad it would get." "The mural," she said, ignoring his thanks. "Why are you doing it for free?" The question caught him off guard. "How did you—" "I'm Elaine Whitmore." She said it like it explained everything, and perhaps it should have. The Whitmore name appeared on hospitals and museums throughout the city. "I'm doing it because—" Marcus paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound trite or self-serving. "Because sometimes art needs to exist without a price tag. Because those kids who stop by every day deserve to see themselves reflected in something beautiful." The truth was more complicated, involving his desperate need for a portfolio piece, his dwindling self-worth, his longing to create something meaningful in a world that seemed increasingly indifferent to beauty. But as the words left his mouth, he realized they weren't a lie either. Elaine's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Where do you live?" By the time the SUV dropped him at his apartment building, Marcus's fingers had regained feeling, but a different kind of sensation had taken root. The uncomfortable awareness that he'd just met someone important, though he couldn't have explained why he felt that way. "The center opens in February," Elaine said as he opened the door. "Will you finish in time?" "Weather permitting," Marcus nodded. "Thank you again for the ride, Mrs. Whitmore." She handed him a card with just a phone number. "If you need anything, supplies, assistance, call this number." He took it, puzzled by the encounter but grateful. "Merry Christmas," he offered. Elaine didn't return the sentiment. As the SUV pulled away, Marcus wondered what kind of person drove through a blizzard to check on a construction site, and why the wealthiest woman in Chicago seemed interested in a mural being painted by a nobody artist for free. Christmas passed in solitary quiet for both Marcus and Elaine. He spent the day video chatting with family in California, sketching new details for the mural, and eating ramen noodles dressed up with an egg for a holiday splurge. She spent it sitting in Thomas's untouched room, looking through photo albums and fighting the undertow of grief that threatened to drag her back into the depths. But something had changed. As Elaine turned pages, showcasing Thomas's growth from chubby toddler to lanky teenager to the handsome young man she'd lost, she found herself thinking about the mural, about how the artist, Marcus, had captured something essential about childhood and possibility, about how Thomas would have loved it. For the first time, the thought of her son came with a sensation other than searing pain. There was still grief, still loss, but alongside it flickered something new, something like appreciation for what had been, rather than just anguish for what was gone. When January arrived with a merciful thaw, Marcus returned to the mural with renewed vigor. The tree at the center now reached full height, its branches detailed with tiny scenes of achievement and joy. The children climbing it showed expressions of determination, fear, hope, triumph, the complex emotional landscape of growing up. He didn't notice the black SUV that parked across the street almost daily, or the woman who watched through tinted windows, sometimes for hours. Elaine couldn't have explained her compulsion to observe the mural's progress, or the artist who created it. She only knew that watching Marcus work, the total commitment in his body language, the way he sometimes stepped back to study the wall with a critical eye, or leaned in to speak softly to the neighborhood children who gathered, ignited something within her that she'd thought was permanently extinguished. One afternoon, as Marcus was adding the final touches to the sun that crowned the composition, a small boy of about 8 approached the mural. Marcus recognized him. Dion, one of the regular watchers who rarely spoke. "Can I add something?" Dion asked, his voice so quiet Marcus had to lean down to hear. Marcus smiled, offering a brush. "What would you like to add?" My brother, Dion said, pointing to a space near the top of the tree. He died last year, but he would have loved this place. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He lifted the boy up to reach the spot, guiding his small hand as they added a subtle silhouette among the branches. A boy looking down with a protective smile at the climbers below. Now he's watching over everyone, Marcus said softly. Dion nodded, satisfaction and grief mingling on his young face. He always said he'd show me how to climb the highest. From her vantage point across the street, Elaine couldn't hear the exchange, but she watched the tenderness with which Marcus handled the child, the careful attention he gave to whatever they were adding together. When the boy was set back down, he threw his arms around Marcus's waist in a fierce hug before running off. Something broke open inside Elaine, a dam that had held back not just pain, but all feeling. Tears came suddenly, shocking in their intensity, blurring her vision of the mural and the artist, and the world outside her window. She cried for Thomas, for the community center he would never see, for the young man painting dreams on a wall for children he didn't know, and for herself, for the living death she'd chosen after losing her son. She cried until her throat ached and her eyes burned, until the SUV's interior grew dark with the winter evening. And when she finally composed herself enough to drive home, Elaine felt lighter than she had in 2 years, as if the tears had washed away not grief itself, but the calcified shell she'd built around it. The mural was completed on a bright February morning, 1 week before the community center's grand opening. Marcus stood before it, exhausted and exhilarated, hardly able to believe the transformation of the once blank wall. Every inch contained meaning, stories within stories, hopes within fears, growth emerging from struggle. At the very top, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it, was the silhouette of Dion's brother. And beside it, Marcus had added another silhouette, a young man with an architect's compass in hand, drawing dreams into reality. He didn't know why he'd added the second figure. It had come to him in a dream, a young man who seemed to oversee the entire scene with pride. When he woke, Marcus knew the figure belonged in the mural, though he couldn't have explained why. As he packed up his supplies for the last time, a familiar black SUV pulled up. Elaine Whitmore emerged, more casually dressed than when he'd last seen her, in jeans and a simple sweater that made her look younger, less severe. "It's finished," she said, standing beside him to take in the entire composition. "Just in time," Marcus nodded. They stood in silence for several minutes, both gazing at the massive artwork. Finally, Elaine spoke, her voice softer than he remembered. "The figure at the top, next to the little boy, that's my son." Marcus turned to her, confused. I don't understand." "Thomas, this was his project, the community center. He designed it during his architecture studies." Her eyes remained fixed on the mural. "He died 2 years ago. A drunk driver." Marcus felt cold despite the sunshine. "Miss Whitmore, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I don't even know why I added that figure. It just felt like it belonged." "It does belong." For the first time, she looked directly at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "When I saw what you were creating here, how you captured exactly what Thomas hoped this place would be for the children, it was like he was speaking through your work." Marcus didn't know what to say. The coincidence, if it was coincidence, left him speechless. "The note in the folder," Elaine continued, "make it something they can dream into." Those were Thomas's words about the mural he wanted for his center. A chill ran up Marcus's spine. Those words had guided every brushstroke, had somehow unlocked something essential in his approach to the project. "I've watched you work for months," she admitted. "At first I just came to check on the construction. But then I saw what you were creating, how you interacted with the children who visited. I saw life again for the first time since I lost him." Marcus understood suddenly why the project had felt so meaningful, why he'd poured himself into it beyond all reason or self-preservation. He'd been an unwitting vessel for something larger, a mother's love, a son's legacy, a community's needs. "I never expected payment," he said quietly, "but I never expected this either." Elaine smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "The opening ceremony is next Saturday. I'd like you to be recognized for your contribution." Marcus thought about his empty refrigerator, the final eviction notice waiting on his kitchen counter, the $6 in his checking account. "I'd be honored," he said, meaning it despite the knowledge that recognition wouldn't pay his rent. Elaine seemed to read his thoughts. "The Whitmore Foundation has an artist-in-residence program at several community centers. It comes with a stipend, studio space, and the opportunity to teach. I'd like to offer you the first position here." The words took a moment to penetrate. A job? You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to continue what you started here. She gestured toward the mural. These children need someone who sees them the way you do, who can help them dream into their own potential. Marcus looked back at the mural, at the children's faces he'd come to know, at the symbolic tree of growth, at the tiny figure of a young architect watching over it all. Why me? He finally asked. Elaine's answer was simple. Because your art made me feel again, and I think Thomas sent you. The community center's opening day dawned clear and cold. Crowds gathered despite the temperature. Neighbors, politicians, media, and most importantly, children. So many children, their excitement visible in puffs of breath in the winter air as they waited for the doors to open on this new space that belonged to them. Marcus stood to the side watching. His new apartment, just 2 blocks from the center, was small but clean, with northern light perfect for painting. The first month's salary from his artist-in-residence position had pulled him back from financial disaster. But more importantly, he'd found purpose. Teaching classes already filled with eager neighborhood kids, including Dion, who showed surprising talent. Elaine took the podium for the ribbon cutting, elegant in a blue coat that matched the sky. Her speech was brief but powerful, explaining how the center fulfilled her late son's vision for the neighborhood where he'd volunteered. When she introduced Marcus as the muralist and new artist in residence, the applause was genuine, especially from the children who already knew him. As the crowd moved inside to explore the new facility, Marcus remained outside, looking up at his mural. In the bright February light, it seemed to pulse with life, the painted children almost moving among the branches of possibility. He felt a presence beside him and turned to find Elaine, her eyes also on the mural. He would have loved this, she said quietly. All of it, but especially what you created. I wish I could have met him. Marcus replied, In a way, you did. Elaine's gloved hand briefly touched his arm. Through these children, his vision lives. And so do I, finally. They stood together in comfortable silence, artist and patron, both transformed by paint and providence, and an unlikely connection neither had sought, but both had needed desperately. Above them, in the highest branches of the painted tree, the silhouette of Thomas seemed to smile down on a world where broken things, hearts, dreams, communities, could find healing through the simplest acts of creation and kindness. And though the winter winds still carried Chicago's characteristic bite, standing there in the shadow of realized dreams, both Elaine and Marcus felt only warmth.